From a minority perspective, consciousness without continuity should not be called consciousness. And the view slightly shifted. Interruptions, weak memory, and inner commentary can be seen as related components in a common operation. If a man could sing a song from beginning to end, the sound of life to him would be totally different than the fragments and sketches he presently hears. Men are normally but a shadow of themselves, an image cast as they stand before the brightness of what they could be, an image that looks just like them, but is only them in potentiality. You cannot comment on life without becoming irritated by it. You cannot comment on you without becoming likewise annoyed. After hearing numerous speculations regarding the purpose of the mind, one man wondered if maybe it came about so that the passions of the body would have a voice. He pondered. Is the birth of human emotion somewhere in all of that? Another thing that's difficult. It's really hard to be angry at someone if you're not engaged in an inner commentary. Check it out. As he stared in the mirror over the sink, suffering the stomach ills from a previous night's drinking, a man said, "Poisoned, and by my own hand." And this idea made him suddenly look up from his torso to his head. No, life does not have it in for you, but for the few to passively accept what life provides amounts to the same thing. Even though you may not be able to stay in a constant state of enlightenment, you can stay in a better state than you are. The head of a nightly order asked one seeking admission, "How long can you hold a hot coal in your hand without thinking about anything else?" Only life is consistent. Everything within it, subject to otherwise. The mind is like an airplane, born to fly, not to sit on the runway. But to become individually conscious, a man must take this situation to a higher level, whereat it is both possible and profitable to have the conveyance not in apparent motion. What is natural and necessary in the year one may not be so later. But there is no later for a man whose awareness is out of control. There's not even much of a now or any time clearly definable. Those who become conscious of their confinement will find that the bars of their cell are not made of steel, but of the interruptions to consciousness. If a man could remember what time it was, from the beginning of a day until its end, he would discover means of freedom within his everyday life that he has never even suspected. You either fly because you're made to fly, or do so after learning how. The reason that man the tadpole believes he is a frog is because frogdom is his rightful state. Eventually. But you won't live long enough for eventually to mechanically kick in. You see, that's where this kind of activity comes in. That which normally goes on in a man's mind should not be thought of as thinking, but rather as just part of the noise produced by life's ceaseless expansion. For a man to be upset by life, he must take it personally. And to take it personally, he must think about it and internally comment on it. And to do that, his consciousness must be continually disjointed. And all of this combined is what he has come to accept as being thinking. And it is. And it is not. It is if you accept it to be, but it's not if you know better and act upon it. When ordinary men want to improve themselves, they like the idea of a supernatural force watching them, already disapproving of their present condition and encouraging a change. Shall we take a blind stroll along the sharp edges of mirrors? Without doubt, part of the mind's power is in its ability to picture the future. But left unchecked, this activity will derail a man's effort to actually move his mind into the future. You'll never begin a journey to a place if you believe that you're already on the way. As always, it's pretty simple. But what trips man up better than the simple? Other than being in the state of enlightenment, there's nothing to do but be here, present in this very moment. Real warriors do not die from defeat. They do not perish from aging, nor do they pass from adverse circumstances. Real warriors only die from distraction. Were a man's consciousness seamless and continuous, he could not be distracted, and thus overcome by any ordinary inevitable force. If a man could hold any state of awareness constantly, without interruptions, anything would be possible. Still simple, still tricky. When you are sans hostility and resistance, even the commonest of men can say things that are wondrously awakening. You end up stuck with a simple attitude of, thank God for life. A certain man who found himself interested in stuff like this, one day, in a friendly and appreciative tone of voice, said to life, I have no idea why I deserve this. In fact, I have no idea what the word deserve actually represents. With good humor and a lack of inner comment, it is joyfully surprising what other ordinary people can reveal to you. If we were to translate common religious ideas to activities such as this, we could think of the devil as being a bad memory and evil as the interruption of consciousness. There are things that are tied together in man that appear to him as disconnected. This is not due to error in his part, but rather to the fact that he is in a continual state of development, and holding such beliefs provides most efficient footing on the path to the future. In the night sky of the ordinary mind goes off a multitude of fireworks. You might care to note that all inner commentaries are disjointed and devoid of illuminating continuity. A businessman once noted to his secretary, the way to cut down on wasteful interruptions is to change the tempo at which you're working. In answer to his question, a father said to a son, yes, it can be good to speak to life, but only if you do not expect a reply. You might notice that in the ordinary world, men continue to voice complaints, register what they consider to be rightful observations of them having both mental and emotional problems. And unless there's some faddish contemporary psychological, inside the profession, psychological attempt to define these in more specific terms, which would be irrelevant even if I knew about it. But do consider, and you've done the same thing, without the need, without the necessity to go seek professional help, that just in common conversation people refer to their emotional problems. And they will refer quite often in almost the same breath. They are not mutually exclusive to people, but they will refer to mental problems. If you ask a person, I would suggest, and you can ask yourself just on the basis of it thus far without trying to read into it anything of an extraordinary nature, if I just ask you, what's your general consensus? What's your general conclusion as the difference between people saying they have mental problems and emotional problems? And I think it's safe to assume, all of us, that conventional thinking would be hard-pressed to define the two, distinguish the two. And we're not now speaking of mental problems on the basis of physical neurological damage, but people just saying, I have mental problems, and then other times they'll say, I have emotional problems. And often they will be describing the same symptoms. As everyone knows, this kind of activity has never been to treat common problems for two reasons. One is there are no common problems, and so thus there can't be any treatments. But this kind of activity is not even really to comment on. I just wanted you to consider that out in the ordinary world, without there being any particular notice made thereof, there is a continual intertwining of mental problems, emotional problems, and at times, if men do not even state them in the category of problems, they will confuse mental activity of a sort that catches their notice, which is normally annoying to some degree, or they would not notice it any more than you notice you don't pay any attention to the workings of your stomach. It's only when you have a stomach ache that you pay any notice to it. So the only time, even if they don't use the terms I was trying to suggest, about the only time that people have occasion to specifically speak of their mood is if the mood is on the negative side, the emotional state, or if their mind seems to be not giving them great bouts of joy, but that their thinking seemed to be giving them some bunch of fits. Why do the two overlap in people's conversation? Why are they at times indistinguishable, the way in which they're used? Now, beyond the level of ordinary people using or stating that they have mental activity that gives them problems, or they have emotions that give them problems, consider someone who does not consider themselves to be set by any particular problems. How about someone who was just trying to improve themselves, even someone who might believe they were interested in activities such as this? Do people start off saying, I would like to think better? Now, if they know what they're doing, we can go ahead and skip the body. I didn't even mention that. They do not go, if they have any intellectual, if they are evolved beyond just the minimal level on this planet at any given time, they would not go seek that which would apparently be involved with extraordinary activity somewhere on the basis that they wanted to join up so that they could look better. So we'll bypass the body. We will assume that no one considers that there's going to change what they are by changing their body. And we all know that people do believe such as that, but that is at the far back ranks of the general parade of human evolution. That's the same sort of people that believe if they had a new car or if they were rich, that it would change what they are. When everybody knows it won't, but what else are you going to do? If that's your interest in life, you go ahead and say that it is, because it's fairly safe, assuming that you'll never get rich anyway. It all works out. To dream, if I was really rich, I would have no emotional, physical, intellect. I'd have no problems. If I was rich, I would have it made. But even if a person were attempting to affect some change in themselves on a metaphysical level, at a transcendental level, the level of consciousness, their internal condition, they would not start out, as I said, if they had the modicum of sophistication. They would not start out on the basis that they're going to do this so as to look better. You can go make yourself look better by just going to a gym. You can stay home and make yourself look some better. But then would they ever think of to say, well, let us say somebody that I made up a story, somebody, or you just imagine yourself, found some mystical school somewhere, some warrior order somewhere involved with the quest for consciousness. And if they were seeking admission or wanted to do an interview, and somebody said, well, why did you come? Why are you interested in this? Would anybody ever say, I want to think better? Now, the closest that it comes to this in ordinary life, people believe that they would be better off if they had more education. They may say, I enjoy learning, which is a hobby. It's a fine hobby. It's almost as good as lifting weights. But does anybody ever say, does anybody ever think or say that they would like to seek the enlightenment or liberation? And you go, well, what do you think what's your idea that would bring to you? Well, I would hope that would bring me the ability to think better. What would people say if they were really pushed? If somebody said, well, for us to even consider letting you hang around here, you're going to have to tell us what's your purpose in life. And they could say, well, I always heard about enlightenment, and that's what I want. And they could say, okay, we'll accept that. But what do you take it to be? What would be the outcome of it? What do you think it would provide you? What would be the benefit to you were you enlightened? They would not say, well, I believe if I was enlightened, I would probably grow 3 inches and lose 50 pounds immediately. They won't say that. But I would also suggest that almost as scarce would be a reply that they believe it would make them think better. There's no sense beating around the bush. What would people eventually come up with if you insisted, well, you've got to give us something? They say, well, I assume that enlightenment, I would understand things. Yeah, but personally, how do you think you would benefit? And they would go, well, all right, I assume that it'd make me feel better. In words, more or less, I would suggest that that's what everyone, and not just doing this, but people somewhere beyond the back ranks of the evolutionary parade, that their idea in life, the greatest benefit they could have is if in some way their general mood of feeling could be improved. I am quite aware that people would stumble around with this because many people would say that their most pressing need is some physical ill they have. There is an area of the human nervous system that has never been charted, and I could go in, I'm not going to, and infer and hint that there was some area in the brain. But there is an area between that which ordinary science can easily observe that seems to be it's normally referred to as the limbic system, that would appear to be somehow connected to, if not the seat of, what humans call their emotions, and then the higher regions of the brain, the cerebral cortex, wherein it seems to, as they call it, involve itself in those abstract and singular areas of man, the abstract areas of thought, which is all thought. But there is an area that is uncharted that's between the two, and this is why, or this is one way to look at the problem in people being able to distinguish between the two. There are several other areas of this. One is the emotions have no voice. And a man speculated in New Time tonight. He wondered whether one of the purposes of the mind was to give, he called it, the passions of the body, a voice. And then he went, and pondered on and said, well, in fact, I wonder if this, somewhere in all of that, is where emotions were born. What he was truly saying is where man's notion of emotions were born. Why is it that people cannot apparently feel better? And why is it, this will be kind of a running parallel question, whether you see the significance or not, or even the connection. Why is it that man cannot apparently directly deal with emotions, and why is it that he continually takes disturbing activities of his mind to be emotional problems? That is my opening salvo. Why do men confuse the idea and say, well, I'm suffering from emotional problems? And they can talk for a few minutes, blah, 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 and without batting an eye, without them even being aware of it, then begin to refer to it as their mental problems. Well, consider this. what ordinary men call emotions, not emotional problems, which I'm not playing with, I'm not arguing with it. Just take it as ordinary people call it, as you know it to be. When ordinary people say, my emotional life is wrecked, I have emotional problems. Or if they said, my biggest pain in life, my biggest obstacle in life are my emotional problems, my ups and downs, and how easily I'm upset, and etc. Can a man have emotional problems if he had no intellect? The answer is no. Can you have emotional problems at any particular time without thinking about them? No. If you had what seems to be emotional problems, and you're aware of the fact of what I'm just stating about playing all the games and making suggestions, anytime you're having emotional problems, you're thinking about them. There is something parallel, and it doesn't have to be constant, because as you know, you're not thinking constantly or consistently. You're thinking in a disjointed manner. But as long as you are, quote, in a bad mood, having some kind of emotional problem, there is something that the mind is in a parallel and fairly continual manner thinking about in regards to it. And if you got really good, you might ask yourself, could you even have any negative emotion if you couldn't think about it? If you were in a state wherein you were having emotional problems, that you were suffering in some way, if the mind could suddenly be stopped, if it could just be stopped and you still be conscious, what would you have left? I'll go ahead and answer it. You would not have emotional problems. You'd have physical problems. You either sometimes see it or you don't, so I'll just press on. So if that be the case, why do men fool around and call it emotional problems? Why don't we call it what it is? I guess someone could think that I did not spend enough time on the mental part, and me just simply saying people confuse it, because people do believe they have mental problems. Most commonly, I guess, could be described as their mind drives them crazy because of thinking about certain things. I know in clinical psychology they have all sorts of divisions and diagnoses, but what is it? What is it with you? Whatever your complaint, whether you consider that you're actually in some neurotic or pathological state, just what is your common complaint with the mind? That sometimes it just goes on and on about the same thing and just drive you nuts. Most people, ordinary people, do not give it that much notice, which kind of makes their claims, once you begin to see it in a certain way, about certain individuals here and there in the common population complaining that they're crazy. This is a little inside humor between us all, with no hostility. But once you see what it is sort of funny for an individual man to say, well, my mind's driving me crazy, when all it means is he's in the same condition as all other ordinary men. He just happened to take notice of it. He doesn't understand that everybody's as crazy as if he called himself that. If he said, well, my mind is about to drive me crazy, I'm on the verge of going insane, he is no closer to going insane than every other normal person. What he needs is watch more TV or go to the movies, which, as already pointed out, if he's got the ability to carry on in a sane, ordinary manner, he will shortly realize that. I got to stop thinking so much, which he can't do. But what he means is, I got to quit paying attention. Because if you don't pay attention, everything's all right. But if you pay attention, and of course I'm talking about two different things. I'm talking about ordinary people and simultaneously, or back and forth, talking about people who might be interested in such as this. Ordinary people, if they ever say that they're having mental problems, they mean it specifically. And you say, mental problems? I mean, there's something bothering you mental. And they go, yeah. And you go, the reason I'm asking you because I hear people refer to their emotional problems or mental problems. And it seems to me I get confused. And so I'm just asking you, you actually mean right now that it's the problems you're having, the suffering that you're experiencing is mental. I mean, is rather emotional. And so they go, yeah, I know what you mean. People say that. But yeah, mine is right now, it's just my mind. But what would they be thinking about? What is it? they will never go any further than that. Or if they do, they'll switch over. If they were talking to someone, they will switch over without noticing it, and they will start getting closer. Not to the source of it, because there is no source, but they're getting closer. Because a man's mind, does your mind, does anybody's mind suddenly come up with a problem? One more time, we're not talking about physical brain damage. But is there actually such a thing as a mental problem? What would be a mental problem? Would a mental problem be that, let's say, that your mind became convinced that 2 and 2 is actually 4.5, and nobody in the world would see it? You know that's ridiculous. Would any sane, ordinary person get to the point that they would consider it a mental problem? I was trying to think of something else that apparently was all right on the surface, but was ridiculous. The kinds of things that people believe, sophisticated people believe that they debate in an intellectual manner. Such as how about the history of some erstwhile country that is now falling apart because of fractional wars that they claim is based upon territorial inequities brought about by some religious conflict or some intertribal conflict 150 years ago. People sit around and debate such as that, like, well, Group A here, they have more claim to take over here. If the country is going to split up, they should get most of it. And it seems to be an intellectual debate. Does anybody actually find that to be a problem? They didn't. It is a debate. If William F. Buckley had that on firing line, and he had on passionate, apparently, I say passionate, that I'm getting silly. Some men, some professors. Well, it is. But there he sits, and the question is, if Yugoslavia is once and for all broken up, should the Serbs or the Croats, based on history, based upon the dynamics of their history, not our opinion, but based on the dynamics of history, who should have the leadership? And so they have Dr. So-and-so here from Harvard University History Department, have so-and-so over here, expert in Middle Eastern, the Middle Eastern office of the State Department. And 4 or 5 of these people who are experts, people who've written books on it, people who have done papers on it, the guy from the State Department, that is his bailiwick, is worrying about what's going on now around the Adriatic areas. And it can be a lively debate. They can talk, somebody interrupts somebody else, one of them say, no, let me finish. But you surely hear this. They could say that is it could be somebody's actual bread and butter there. That right now they're making their living. They're holding on to their tenure, or they're holding their position simply through their so-called expertise in the Yugoslavian problem. But do they consider it a problem, even though they can get the beef, those kind of people, a little animated, enough to say, could I please finish? Don't interrupt me. But if you ask the people, those kind of people, would you expect that after the show, there's going to be a fist fight in the parking lot? All right, that's all I'm trying to get you to see, and you can think up your own examples I've tried to give you. There simply are no such things, really, as mental problems. So what is it that people mean when they say I've got mental problems? It would be somebody, to use that same example, it would be somebody, let's say that their relatives are Serbs, and they've been keeping up this, and they still have relatives there. And they keep hearing about the atrocities that the Croats are supposedly inflicting on the Serbs. And I'm just pulling out just an example that's fairly current. It could become a problem then, and they could say, well, I'm having a mental problem with what's going on over there. All I do is think about. Every week it seems like it's a new atrocity I read about. I get letters. I see things on the news. I even hear that damn so-and-so, the leader of the opposing, going, yeah, 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 and I hear it in my head, and it drives me crazy. I wake up in the morning, and I'm thinking about the damn injustice of it all. All right? He would be describing. That is about as close as ordinary people can actually get to something that apparently fits the bill, that it's a mental problem. As I said, it's almost an idée fixe, that there is something that just goes on in their mind, and they say, it is driving me nuts and I can't stop it. And it seems to be a mental problem. That is about as good an example as they could come up with. It is something they keep thinking over and over. It could be, my wife ran off and left me, my husband went off and left me, and as they left, they turned around and said, well, nah, 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 nah. And I think about it, it goes on. I hear it all the time. I'll be watching TV. There'll be somebody in a love scene, and suddenly I'll hear my husband going, nah, 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 nah. And it becomes serious enough that people seek professional help. But what I'm saying is, that is about the best description that ordinary people can give if we were saying, what's the difference between a mental problem and an emotional problem? Then that would be the best they could do. That my mind starts running on something, and it will not let go. I can't get out of it. It goes on and on and on and over and over. I'll go to sleep doing it, and I'll wake up doing it. All right, that sounds right. Except for this, is the basis of it. I just made up several, worrying about, since you're Serbian, that it's now become just almost an intellectual mania with you, that you can't stop thinking about what's going on and the way the Serbs are being mistreated by all reports. All the way from that to the last words your husband said when he ran off with a Mary Kay salesman door to door. Sales lady, I hope. All right, they would both seem to be, that a person would identify it for the sake of our conversation if we brought it up, that we were interested in the apparent problem people have distinguishing between intellectual and emotional problems, or at least the problem we have, seeing the distinction. And so their description would be something that goes, this means on and on, so I don't keep wasting on my good hand gesture. Goes on and on. All right, that sounds okay except for this. Is the basis of it mental? That's enough. Certainly not. I'm back to you. There is no such thing as a mental problem. There are mental challenges trying to figure out the design for a new program, trying to figure out how to, design something, how to build something, a solution to some actual problem out in the external world. But there is no such thing as a mental problem. No one has ever woke up in the morning. No one's ever been alive and suddenly in their mind, that their mind had something that had been working on them, something that the mind had observed happen, that became a problem. It simply does not exist. And if any of you think that sounds too weird, then between now and next time we meet, go home and try to come up with one. Try to inflict your mind, try to get your mind to come up. But it's got to be a mental problem. Because if it's not, I'll see through it in a bat second. And unless your heart for a hobby, you can save your time, but you can try it because there are none. You cannot come up with a mental problem. If you have a mental problem, if you're having mental problems, and as I said, about the best description you can give is that your mind is driving you crazy with a repetitive thinking about some problem. But the problem is not based on any intellectual matter. It is based upon passion. That is the only thing that creates to humans problems. There are no other problems. Well, there's a problem of staying alive, which is strictly a physical problem. You stay alive as long as you can, then you die. But nobody thinks about being a problem unless you're under the conditions wherein starvation is plaguing your heels. But you still don't look at it as a problem. It's not like something I've got to overcome. It's if I'm hungry, I've got to eat or I'll die. But you don't call it a problem. It's not like, well, a challenge. I mean, it's something I can't figure out. So if there, in that sense, if you understand me, there are actually no physical problems. You can die, but it's not a problem. Nobody goes to a doctor, calls up a doctor, makes an appointment, waits 2 weeks, goes in to see the physician. He says, "What's your problem?" And you say, "I am starving to death." You know, that is not a problem. If you said that, you got a problem, beyond starving to death. You do not have a mental problem. There's no psychiatric classification to deal with physical problems. And there are actually no physiological diagnoses to deal with those kind of physical problems. That's not a problem. That's self-destruction. It's not a problem. So the body doesn't actually have problems in the sense that people have emotional or mental problems, as they say. If you got that, now if you're following it, I'm telling you for a fact, it's easy to see. All you got to do is look. There's no such thing as a mental problem. Everything that humans consider to be problems, one more time, we're not talking about hunger, freezing to death, that is survival, and those are not problems. If you're about to die, I know it's a problem, but it's not a problem that you go and seek treatment, or you go, what will I do? You know what to do. You may not be able to do it, but it's not a problem. It may be an impossibility. You may be in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the Gobi Desert, by yourself, and you're real thirsty. You're about to die. So it may be impossible to survive, but it wasn't a problem. It wasn't you out there dying of dehydration going, why do I feel so bad? I feel, to tell you the truth, I feel like I could be seriously ill. I wonder what I might do to rectify it. Simply not so. All right, so if we got no such thing as physical problems, and I point out to you, which is easy to see, although it's a complete contradistinction, but it is demonstratively simple as shit to see. You can see it in yourself at any given time. But anyway, you should be able to see it even theoretically if in this very second I'm talking you're not in a particular mood one way or the other. There are no such things as mental problems. When they get to be mental problems and they come to a person's notice and he calls them or she calls them a mental problem, what you're doing is describing that which is going on through your mind that is being fueled by the emotions. It can get really tricky then to consider if there are actually any such thing as emotions, as I said, or whether they're being fueled by something else. But let's leave all that for a moment and get into something that I've been writing news items about a kind of self-deception. With ordinary people, I guess it's sort of dangerous in the sense that they will easily get misled and not know what I'm talking about, but what the hell. I mean, that's to infer that if I'm real careful, the ordinary people can listen to it and go, oh, well, I know what you're talking about now. Now that you watched it. Self-deception is not what ordinary people call, because I know it has all sorts of common connotations. There's only one kind of self-deception possible. It is not willful, it is not psychological based, it is not due to any individual unconscious trauma from your past. Everyone is engaged, from the sane to the semi-sane to the rich to the poor, are engaged in a kind of self-deception. It's unfair to call it that because you didn't decide to do it any more than you decided to be yourself, any more than you were decided to be born. But it is a kind of self-deception. That is, that there's things, forget scouring the corners of the planet and going to find secret information. You are absolutely, under ordinary conditions, an ordinary man is almost blind to what's going on in him. And I don't mean individual in that sense that philosophers and ordinary psychologists and ordinary philosophers, of course, would take the idea that the unexamined life is not worth living and you should know yourself. Yeah. They don't even know where to start. They start off trying to examine themselves with a self-deceptive mechanism. But back to what we're talking about, that you'll see in a minute, I assume, that I'm inferring something else besides just ordinary fooling of oneself. There's only one kind of self-deception possible. First off, there is no such thing as physical deception. This is not discount. We've all read. There are pathological states in psychology wherein it's claimed that there are people, usually it's, I think, with eating disorders is what they now attribute it to, that have supposedly a gross self-deceiving image of themselves physically. That is, little girls or boys in high school that weigh 87 pounds and refuse to eat, and they stand in front of their mirror while their mother's screaming and say, I'm going to put you in a home, or I'm going to call a doctor, and they stand right in front of a mirror supposedly and go, well, look at me. I am so fat and I'm ashamed to go to school. It's horrible. And she is literally skin and bones. I am not speaking of that. That is truly outside the mainstream. The point is, an ordinary person, which is the only thing we ever even use as a basis, as you know, for me to spring from there into something a little extraordinary, we got to speak of the ordinary. An ordinary person cannot deceive themselves physically. You simply cannot. You can look down, you can look in the mirror, and if your nose is twice as big as an ordinary person and you're sane, you will take some notice that my nose is large. Or if someone says, you ever notice your nose is large? You'll have to admit, yes, I have. Well, it's nothing else to say. You go, yes, I have. Have you noticed that you've been putting on weight? Yes. Do you notice that you're shorter than everybody else around here? Yes, I've noticed that. A sane person cannot deceive themselves physically. It is impossible. If you're sane and your senses are, if you're ordinary and sane, you cannot deceive yourself physically. And you cannot deceive others also, if you want to say it that way. You can't go up to somebody else and say, have you noticed how thin I am when you weigh 450 pounds? You cannot go up to another sane person and say that. Or go up to them and say, have you noticed how much smaller my nose is than ordinary person's? All right. Contrary to what seems to be, again, common, unanalyzed, conventional thinking, you cannot fool anyone, you cannot deceive yourself or anyone else intellectually. Oh, you can distract them momentarily, temporarily. But anything strictly of an intellectual nature, as much as possible, if you do engage, now it's true, you can apparently engage in a bit of deception with people, intellectually. But if it is something that is intellectually provable or disprovable, that's demonstratively either one way or another, it will eventually be discovered, whether it be an hour from now or next week. That is, by other people interested in it. Those you're trying to deceive, if their interest continues, if it is strictly an intellectual affair that you're saying. Well, if you're saying that you borrowed money from someone, and they say, well, what's your collateral? And you say, it's I have a CD in the bank that I don't want to touch. And if they lend you money, and they, for whatever reason, finally decide, oh, by the way, my bank insists I do have to see that CD because I have to copy the number down, I can't take your word for it. It's simply bank rules. You understand? It's not a matter of how soon and people can lose interest. But the thing is, if it is something that is intellectually provable, even though we're talking about a physical entity, but it could be a bookkeeping entry instead of an actual CD, if it is something, well, it's like saying in the other room, if I say, I have got a purple hippopotamus in there, and I did for some reason, like, everybody give me $10. At any rate, all you got to do is go in there. It is intellectually provable, one way or the other, that something exists, doesn't exist, is true or false. Or saying, I figured out how to make 2 and 2 5. Somebody can say, really? And you go, yes, you don't know this, but I have been, in my spare time, engaged in extremely abstract mathematics to such a point that I can't find anybody even at MIT who will now correspond with me. You can do all that stuff and say, I have a theorem. And there's no doubt. I've sent it off and other people's agreed. It cannot, as unbelievable as it sounds, I can prove that 2 and 2 is 4.5. Well, eventually, you can call it deception, but eventually, if anyone's interested, that will be found out. So that's why I'm saying there is actually no such thing as mental deception. If there's mental deception going on, it is simply because if it's as mental as I'm saying it is, that kind of example. If the deception continues, it is only because the deceiver is not being called on it. So it will, and it can be, and it will be, if interested parties continue to be involved, it will eventually be found out. So you can't call it deception, you can call it a stalling tactic. But it is not actual deception. There's only one kind of deception that even begins to meet that, and that's emotional. And emotional deception and self-deception is almost impossible to catch. If that sounds too strange, then consider this. If you ask yourself or you ask other people, if you ask, what is a person? What are you? And they say, well, I'm a man and I'm a Norwegian. You go, no. I mean, forget all that. Forget the external trappings and those kind of cultural classifications. What is a man? Don't give me a physiological, don't give me a breakdown of him zoologically, but a human. We're assuming that humans are unique on this planet, okay? Well, what is each person? How do we know that one person is another? Not their looks, but what is an individual? What is a man as an individual? The more simple people would they would still want to limit it to his body. Not limit it, they would want to specify, would be his body. They say, well, he is what he is uniquely, physically. That he is what he is, whether he's a man, whether he's a woman, whether he's tall, whether he's short, whether he's in good health, bad health, whether he's lean and muscular, whether he's fat and out of shape, whether he seems to be self-confident, at ease with the way he looks, or whether he seems to be shy, he seems to be self-conscious in the social sense. That's not a man. We all know that. You know it for no other reason. Ordinary people, as always, they'll never know it individually, but they know it through experience that somebody can have something happen to them. Somebody can be rendered blind. Somebody can lose their legs in a car accident. And it doesn't change what they are. It would change their looks. That is, if you had started off saying, well, what creates an individual, or what a man is, if we're going to speak of him as one individual as opposed to another, what actually identifies him is his physical characteristics, his physical uniqueness. No. Through experience. They have no need to see it, but ordinary people know that's not true. You can get older. You see somebody and they're 90 or 80 years old and they don't look anything. In their youth, they were a world-class athlete. Now they're broken down, hunched over from arthritis and broken hips and all sorts of things. Internally, individually, they're the same person. You might not have seen them since they were 20, and now you see them at 80, and it's been 60 years. 60 years worth of experiences and all sorts of changes that they've gone through, and physically, they don't resemble the person, and yet as soon as you get up close to them, look in their eyes, speak to them a minute, they hadn't changed. You could try to jump on the mental bandwagon and say it has something to do with their mind, but that's not even worthy of, especially since we're running out of time, that's not worthy of any real note. You know what it is, I'll go ahead and do it for you. It's more than just this, but given the choice between all that which seems readily available as benchmarks, as general identifying characteristics of humans, what is it that makes you feel, I know you never analyze it ordinarily in any particular way, but what is it that gives you your feeling of individuality? It's your general mood. And I say mood rather than emotions, because emotions seem to be things that come and go, which is not as simple as it seems, but is a general mood. And that is what you would spot, and such as an example I just gave of someone you saw that was a professional athlete, just an archetypical, physical, oriented person at 20, and then you saw them 60 years later, and they're just a shell of a human. What you would spot, though, when I said they haven't changed that much, would be their mood would still be what it was. Probably a little exaggerated, but it would still be basically, you would recognize, well, you're the same old person. So what is it? How is it that humans, they don't take this much into account, but how is it that humans, again, without any analyzation, without any particular notice of it, how do humans, with unquestionably, those interested in such matters, identify animals from another, especially those in breeding, with horses, dogs? They identify them as when they're young. They can distinguish them. And I'm disregarding that one of them's extremely in a litter, one of them's only born with 1 foot, or one of them's born blind. If there's a whole litter of dogs and they all look about the same, how is it that a breeder, someone around them, can just instantly, within hours after they're born almost, begin to distinguish them? Their mood. They have, we don't call it moods in animals, but they have a mood. They have a general mood, and you can see it within hours after they're born, within a day. Now, I could tell you something about humans too, but there might be some civilians watching this, and they would even take more umbrage. So we'll leave it at puppies. There is a general mood. No one thinks about it in that manner. If I insisted, if we made it some sort of parlor game, that everyone tell me how you feel that you're you. And we've already discarded all the, don't tell me, well, I would say that I'm average looking. I would say that I'm about average. No, I'm not interested at all in how you look. Let's disregard that. Okay. And they might say, okay, well, I've got a master's. No, I don't hear about that. Don't tell me what you know. Don't tell me the knowledge that you have filed away. Don't tell me that. That's not you. Because that's just sort of an accident. You got to admit that. And if you're really sharp, you might say, yeah, you're right, because I had to work my way through school. My older brother, the family gave him some money to go to school, and there was nothing left. You're right. I got a scholarship the first year by accident to go to community college. All this. The point is that I now have a degree. I have some knowledge outside the ordinary that I was about to say distinguishes me as a person. I feel that my knowledge, my expertise, I'm now an attorney, a physician, an accountant. I'm a professional man. I'm a programmer. That my intellect, my wits are at the heart of what I am. No, it's not. Because you can. An ordinary person could, if they wanted to. They could still picture themselves being them if they had not gone to school. They can. Not that they want to, not that they would try to, but I'm saying that they can on the basis that you see that it's just obvious. There's no debate about it. What a man knows is not what he is. Not through some theory. You can take away, well, it's simply not. So what are you left with? Again, no one sits around, walks around thinking in this way. But your sense of individuality, your sense of you as opposed to everyone else out there, that it's you in life. When I say opposed, I simply mean that you are not merged with other people. You're not running into them like some Dolly watercolor left out in the rain. That other people are in some way distinguishable from you. You're you, they're them. We're individuals. Each one of us, we're different people. Yeah. But what is that individuality? How does it express itself in you? And no one ever thinks about it, I still admit. It is your general mood. Again, people would want to ill-distinguish it. Because if I was discussing this with an ordinary sane person, they would still probably want to insist that, well, maybe feelings, moods come into it somewhere, but really my individuality to me are my thoughts. Because my thinking is so much different from many people. Politically, the kinds of people I'm around, my ideas of what is socially proper and acceptable, my thoughts, my taste in music, where I live, all sorts of things that they're mentally based. They would want to complain. No, they're not. Not a one of them. There is no such thing as mentally based. The closest thing to mentally based are those absolutely abstract inventions of the mind, such as mathematics and language. But the rest of that, your taste, your feelings, your sense of morality, that's mentally based? Not at all. I about covered it. Outside of language and mathematics, of course, scientific theorems of all sorts, but we're talking about the world strictly that can exist on paper. That's the only place it actually exists. Other than that, there is no such thing as mentally based. So when someone says that their individuality is based upon, of course, they've got to get past what I said. Yeah, we all look a little bit different. Yeah, okay. But my true individuality, an ordinary man would say, and the more educated, the more up-to-date he was, the more he would want to insist that I was way off the track. That it, in fact, is not just his body, although he believes in being in good health, blah, blah, blah. It is his intellectual activity. It is his mental life that actually distinguishes him and other people, one from another. And everybody should be able to see why a person would say that. But I repeat to you, You can take it as a challenge and try to find an exception. There are no such things as strictly mentally based, other than those kinds of abstract inventions that exist solely within the mind. They have no physical. They have no. They represent something externally, but they have no physical reality. It is a man's mood. It is never called that. Even if you called it that and you told somebody that, their feeling would still be something like, geez, I don't know. What's the point? There is a kind of beauty in that kind of facetious sense of beauty at the very base of how people sense their individuality is their moods, and a man's moods are the very thing in which all men can almost freely engage in deception, self-deception, and never get caught. Self-deception. Now, men attempt to catch each other all the time. They attempt to beat each other with catching them in self-deception. You don't really love me, you're just saying that. You keep saying you love me, but you wouldn't have treated me that way. You kept saying you're my friend, but you wouldn't have cheated me in that deal. They attempt to use it on each other. But for a man to catch himself engaged in self-deception at an emotional level is all but impossible. Which, since we're out, then I'll wrap up and at least point out, if from no other view, there is why men cannot see any distinction. That they want to keep calling emotional problems something else. Or finding impossible to describe emotional problems. All they can do is describe what's going through their mind, and then even they're not satisfied with it. Which is one of the little side effects that they, as far as I know, take no particular notice in talking analysis. They're trying to treat people who consider they have emotional or mental problems serious enough for professional help. He says, well, explain to me how you feel, psychiatrist. And the person explains and explains, and then they get through and they go, I still hadn't said it to you correctly. And he goes, well, we got the rest of the hour. Take your time. Explain it to me. And they get through, and the psychiatrist kind of waits, and they go, well, that's not it. They are attempting an absolute impossibility, and it's based upon a kind of self-deception, but not the kind of self-deception that the psychiatrist, were he to hear me say this, would go, well, you're right. That's exactly why we're here. He's deceiving himself. There's something deep in his past that's happened to him that he won't let come out. But that's what I'm here for. It'll never come out. There's nothing there. They're attempting to extract something that's not there. Or, looked at another way, they're attempting to extract the wrong thing. The self-deception based on emotion, which is really the only kind that deserves the name self-deception, because it is continual, it is almost impossible to be caught. It is that deception upon which an ordinary man's conception of himself, his individuality, is based. So since tape's out, and I may not ever show up again or die, you take it from there. That the very thing upon which ordinary people are based is a self-deception, and not one caused by anything, not one that can be cured, but on a self-deception that is all but impossible for the mind to ever even conceive of. It can be talked about, and the mind go, damn, some of that almost made sense, and you lost me. I'm not sure what you said. I know. It is the one thing that cannot be found out, or is almost impossible. And I don't mean, when I say found out, just on the basis that you're emotionally fooling yourself in some way. It's that it cannot be found out that is the center, the basis of how you feel that you're an individual, is based upon mood. Except you call it everything but that. Not only in you, half the time people bestow the characteristics, the manifestations of their moods on circumstances. Well, they say, well, look what happened to me. I mean, you think it's funny the way I acted, or it kind of surprised me, to tell you the truth, but my God, I never had anything like that happen. I was shocked. So it seems to be that, the thing that happened. Well, nobody ever treated me like that. So that was it. Well, yeah. Huh?